Her passport turned to ashes in the officer's hands, and laughter filled the airport. But within minutes, those same cops who mocked her would be trembling, because the woman they tried to humiliate was no ordinary traveler. She was the Attorney General's wife. The airport was alive with the sound of rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and hurried footsteps when a well-dressed black woman moved gracefully through the terminal, her calm smile suggesting she had done this countless times before. She wore elegance with ease, her suitcase trailing behind her, her documents neatly in hand as she approached the checkpoint. The officer at the counter glanced at her passport and ticket, but instead of the usual polite nod, his face twisted into suspicion. He whispered to his partner, who joined in, both of them eyeing her with thinly veiled hostility. "This doesn't look real," the first one said loudly, his voice echoing across the checkpoint, drawing curious stares from nearby travelers. The woman held her ground, her tone firm but respectful. "That is my valid passport. Please take a proper look." Her words were calm, but the officers were not interested in reason. They flipped the passport back and forth as though searching for an excuse, their voices growing harsher, louder, almost as if they wanted an audience for the scene they were creating. Soon, passengers began to slow their pace, some taking out their phones, others whispering to one another as the tension thickened in the air. The woman adjusted her posture, refusing to look intimidated, her steady gaze locking on the officers who seemed to relish the power they believed they held. Every second of the encounter was meant to diminish her dignity, but she remained unshaken, her quiet strength contrasting sharply with their aggression. The crowd sensed something was wrong, but no one stepped forward yet. To them, it looked like just another random check. To her, it was the beginning of something much darker, an attack on her identity, her humanity, and soon, her very name. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as the two officers pushed the woman aside and began whispering with another colleague, their eyes darting at her passport as though it was some kind of threat. She kept her voice steady, reminding them, "That document is federal property, it represents my identity, and you have no right to tamper with it." But the officers were far too drunk on arrogance to listen. With a smirk that dripped with malice, one of them held the passport between his fingers and said loudly, "If it's real, let's see how it holds up." Before she could react, a lighter sparked, and the flames licked the corner of the passport. Gasps erupted from the surrounding passengers, phones shot up in the air recording, and someone shouted, "Hey, you can't do that." But the officers only sneered, watching the flames consume the pages that held her life's travels, her identity, her proof of belonging. The woman's heart pounded, but she stood tall, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The officers laughed, tossing the charred remains into a metal bin, dismissing her as though she were powerless. Yet the energy in the terminal shifted. The passengers, once hesitant, began voicing outrage. "That's illegal," one cried. "She showed you everything," another shouted. The officers puffed their chests, barking at the crowd to back off, but the scene was already spiraling out of their control. The woman remained calm, her poise unnerving them. She didn't scream, she didn't crumble. She simply pulled out her phone and dialed a single number, her fingers steady as stone. The lead officer smirked and taunted. "Who are you calling? Your boyfriend? Your lawyer?" She locked her eyes on him and replied coldly, "Neither. But you'll find out soon enough." Her voice carried across the stunned silence of the terminal, leaving even the onlookers breathless. Something about her confidence unsettled the officers, though they tried to shake it off. What they didn't know was that the spark they lit by burning her passport would ignite a fire much bigger than the flames they had just created. As the smoke of the burned passport lingered in the terminal, the woman kept her composure, her phone still pressed to her ear. The crowd hushed, sensing that something big was about to happen. Within minutes, the echo of heavy footsteps cut through the chaos, and a team of suited security agents stormed into the airport. Their presence was sharp, commanding. This wasn't airport staff or regular police. The lead agent scanned the room, eyes locking onto the woman, and immediately approached with respect. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his tone crisp but urgent. The officers who had mocked her just moments ago exchanged nervous glances, suddenly unsure. The woman turned slowly toward them, her expression calm but her words like thunder. "Meet the Attorney General's wife." The terminal erupted into stunned gasps, phones recording every angle as the truth dropped like a bomb. The officers stammered, their arrogance evaporating in an instant, their faces pale with the weight of their mistake. "Why, your husband is..." one tried to mutter, but the woman cut him off sharply. Yes, the nation's attorney general, and you just committed a federal crime on camera. The agents wasted no time, surrounding the corrupt officers, their badges flashing as they read them their rights. The one-scocky men now trembled, their earlier laughter replaced with desperate pleas. It was just a mistake, we didn't know. But the woman's steady voice sliced through their excuses. Ignorance does not excuse injustice. You humiliated me, violated the law, and thought no one would hold you accountable. The passengers, now emboldened, began cheering and shouting for justice, their voices uniting in support of her. The officers, who only minutes earlier had mocked her identity, now found themselves handcuffed, their futures unraveling before their eyes. The woman stood tall in the center of it all, her elegance glowing even brighter in their downfall. For the first time that night, it wasn't just her standing against them, it was an entire crowd, a tide of voices demanding fairness. And as the agents led the disgraced officers away, she finally allowed herself the faintest smile. This wasn't just about her passport anymore, it was about something much bigger, and everyone in that terminal could feel it. The terminal buzzed with disbelief as the disgraced officers were dragged away in handcuffs, but the drama was far from over. Just as the crowd began to settle, the sliding doors at the far end of the hall opened, and in walked a tall, commanding figure surrounded by a small detail of aides, the Attorney General himself. The room fell into a heavy silence, every camera phone shifting toward him. His eyes immediately found his wife, and with a firm but gentle hand, he reached for her, making sure she was safe before turning his steely gaze on the chaos around them. "Who touched my wife?" His voice carried across the terminal like a thunderclap, each word sharp enough to cut the air. The crowd parted, whispering in awe, as the humiliated officers were shoved forward in chains, their arrogance now completely shattered. The Attorney General stepped closer, his towering presence making them shrink with shame. "You burned a United States citizen's passport, you violated her dignity, and you thought there would be no consequences?" His tone was controlled but laced with fire. The officers stammered, We didn't know who she was," but he silenced them instantly. "You shouldn't have to know someone's name or position to treat them with basic respect. That is the failure that destroys trust in this uniform." His words rang out like a verdict, drawing cheers and applause from the passengers who had witnessed it all. The Attorney General then addressed the crowd, his hand still protectively on his wife's shoulder. "No woman, no citizen, no human being deserves to be treated as less. Not today, not ever." The moment was electric, the crowd rising to its feet in thunderous applause, their chants echoing through the terminal like a wave. The officers, heads hung low, were escorted out, their careers ending in disgrace. But for the passengers, and especially the woman standing tall beside her husband, the message was seared into memory. Justice was not just a word, it was a force that could not be burned or silenced. And in that instant, the terminal felt less like an airport and more like the stage of history itself. The crowd in the terminal still buzzed with shock and excitement, their phones capturing every angle of what had just unfolded. The woman, who had stood in silence while her dignity was burned before their eyes, now stood taller than ever, her hand clasped firmly with her husband's. She didn't need to shout or demand respect. The entire room had already seen her strength in the way she carried herself, even when everything was stacked against her. Attorney General turned to the passengers and said, "What happened here today isn't just about my wife. It's about every person who has ever been humiliated, ignored, or mistreated because of the color of their skin, their gender, or simply because someone thought they had no power." His words rolled through the crowd like a wave, and heads nodded, some with tears in their eyes. The woman then spoke for the first time, her voice steady but emotional. "When they burned my passport, they thought they burned my identity. But my worth, my rights, and my voice, those can never be set on fire." The terminal erupted in applause, the sound echoing like thunder across the walls. In that moment, the passengers weren't just bystanders, they were witnesses to a truth they would carry with them long after boarding their flights. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and hashtags exploded online within minutes, turning the story into a global headline. As the couple walked toward their gate, hand in hand, the Attorney General paused and looked back once more, his eyes cold with resolve. "Every badge should stand for justice. If it doesn't, then it stands for nothing." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving the stunned silence of the terminal behind. The story didn't just end there, it became a spark, a reminder to millions watching later that no act of injustice, no matter how small, would go unanswered. And as the woman boarded her plane, the world knew this wasn't just a victory for her, it was a warning to anyone who thought power could excuse cruelty. Justice had spoken, and its voice was unforgettable. Like, comment, and share to keep the fire of these powerful stories alive. Subscribe to Black Stories for the next jaw-dropping tale you can't afford to miss.